part of anime's appeal is how characters are able to do insane things on the screen. Take My Hero Academia, for example, where people have superhuman powers called quirks. The protagonist, called Deku's quirk, is to be able to release massive shockwaves of energy from his body. My thought process when watching usually goes something like this. Wow, it sure is great that the rules of physics don't apply to anime characters. They would never be able to pull off half the stuff they do. Unless, can physics still exist in this fictional world? Can science and anime logic coexist or even complement each other? In this case, at least, the answer is yes, and we can use Newton's third law to see how. Newton's third law is often quoted as every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That's kind of confusing to visualize, so let's put it like this instead. If object A exerts a force on object B, then object B will exert a force of equal magnitude and opposite direction on object A. Let's look at an example. When you're walking, your feet exert a force against the ground. If you want to move forwards, you actually push your feet backwards. When you do this, the ground exerts a force of the same magnitude right back on your feet, except this time the force is forwards, the opposite direction to the force you applied, allowing you to keep moving. These forces don't cancel out because they're acting on two different objects, your foot and the ground. From this, we see that a Newton's third law pair of forces have three properties. The forces are of equal magnitude, act in opposite directions, and on two different objects. So, how does this all relate to Deku and his quirk? Deku's quirk allows him to release a lot of energy into his surroundings. The formal definition of energy is the capacity to do work, and we know that work is the product of force and distance. So, in other words, Deku is exerting a large force on his surroundings. Look at him getting ready to jump into the air. We can clearly see him push down with his foot. Because his body is able to exert such a large force, the ground reciprocates by exerting the same amount of force on him, except the force on his body acts upwards, pushing him into the sky. And this is a Newton's third law pair because it fulfills all three properties. Remember, it's not the force that Deku exerts himself, but rather the reaction force he's able to produce that lets him do what he does. Use another example. This time, Deku is able to exert a force on the air in front of him, using it to push an opponent back. As a result, the air exerts a force on him, pushing him backwards. But why isn't he moving back? This is because Newton's third law comes into play again. See his feet digging into the ground? He exerts a backward force on the ground, which produces a forward reaction force, friction. This friction cancels out the effects of the force from the air on his body to keep him in place. However, this is not a Newton's third law pair of forces because the two forces both act on the same object, his body. Rather, they are the result of two other instances of the third law to show how different forces are created and balance each other so that Deku can use his powers effectively. And there you have it. By producing large amounts of force with his own body, Deku is able to create a large enough reaction force to fight off villains and save the day. Far from being a limitation, real life science is what allows insane anime moves to be possible at all. Clearly, the real number one hero is Newton's third law.